Heath Ledger sits on a hotel bed at 2:47 a.m., staring at hands that no longer feel like his own. He hasn't moved in 4 hours. Tonight, Heath Ledger will learn something about acting that will eventually destroy him. Wyoming, January 2006. The Brokeback Mountain rap party ended 3 hours ago, scattering cast and crew back to their real lives, their real identities, their real voices. But Heath can't leave this room. The door is unlocked. His car keys sit on the nightstand. His phone shows 17 missed calls from his agent. But Heath can't move. Something is wrong with his breathing. Too shallow, too controlled. The kind of breathing you do when you're afraid to make noise. Except there's no one else here. The silence has weight, pressing against his eardrums, making his skull feel too small. The voice in his head isn't his anymore. For 3 months, Heath has been living inside Ennis Del Mar's emotional landscape. Method acting demands complete immersion. And Heath has always been thorough. Too thorough. He's the actor who reads psychology textbooks to understand his character's mental states, who learns accents by living with native speakers for weeks, who researches family histories that will never appear in the script. But this time, something went wrong. What Heath discovers at 3:30 a.m. will redefine everything he thinks he knows about disappearing. When Heath thinks now, it's with Ennis's careful hesitation. When he feels emotions, they're filtered through the character's suppressed grief, his bone-deep loneliness, his rage at a world that won't let him love freely. Heath reaches for his phone to call someone, anyone, and his hand stops halfway, because he's not sure who would answer if he spoke. The bathroom mirror reflects Heath's face, but something else looks out from behind his eyes. He touches the glass. The reflection touches back. For a moment, just a moment, Heath can't tell which one is real. This fracture didn't happen dramatically. There was no breakdown on set, no moment of crisis that anyone witnessed. It accumulated slowly, like water filling a basement. By the time Heath noticed, he was already drowning. Week 2 of filming, Heath realized he was standing like Ennis, even when cameras weren't rolling. The character's physical tension, hunched shoulders, careful movements through space had become Heath's default posture. Week 4, Heath caught himself ordering coffee in Ennis's voice. Quiet, hesitant, like speaking was inherently dangerous. Week 6, Heath stopped eating lunch with the crew, not because he was antisocial, but because Ennis needed solitude. The character's discomfort in groups had become Heath's lived experience. Week 8, Heath's sleep patterns disintegrated, not from excitement about the role or stress about performance, but because Ennis's insomnia had colonized Heath's unconscious mind. Every night brought the character's restless dreams, his suppressed desires, his wordless grief. By week 12, Heath could no longer distinguish between his emotional responses and Ennis's. The character's pain felt like his own pain. The fictional anguish of loving someone you can never have became real anguish that Heath carried in his chest like broken ribs. But Heath hasn't realized this night is rehearsal for something much worse. Heath grips the bathroom sink until his knuckles turn white. The porcelain is cold, immediate, real. He focuses on the sensation, trying to anchor himself in physical reality. But even his grip feels wrong. Ennis would hold things differently, more carefully, like everything in the world might shatter if handled too roughly. The thought arrives unbidden. I'm thinking like him even now. 3:23 a.m. Heath returns to the bed and resumes his vigil. The digital clock's red numbers feel aggressive in the darkness. Minutes crawl past with geological slowness. Outside his window, Wyoming sleeps under an endless sky that feels more like a ceiling pressing down, trapping him in this suffocating space between reality and performance. He tries calling his sister in Australia, dials the number 3 times and hangs up before it connects. What would he say? How do you explain that you've lost the ability to be yourself? That you've become so thoroughly someone else that your own identity feels like a poorly fitting costume? The 4th time, he lets it ring. Heath? Jesus, what time is it there? Michelle's voice cuts through the silence like a blade, familiar, warm, completely his. The sound of someone who knew him before all this began, who still believes Heath Ledger is a fixed, knowable person. Heath opens his mouth to respond and freezes. The voice that wants to emerge isn't his. It's quiet, weighted with things that can never be said, carrying the emotional residue of a fictional character's unexpressed love. Ennis's voice. I'm fine. Sorry. Wrong time. Go back to sleep. He hangs up before she can respond. The conversation lasts 47 seconds. In those 47 seconds, Heath discovered he can no longer trust his own voice. The person Michelle knew, the brother who would normally tell her about his work, his thoughts, his day, is buried under layers of fictional experience. Heath sits with his phone in his lap, staring at the dark screen. This is when he understands the real cost of what he's done to himself. The hotel room grows smaller with each passing hour. Heath begins pacing, 12 steps from window to door, 12 steps back. He's counted this circuit 847 times since midnight. The repetitive motion should be soothing, meditative. Instead, it's torture. Because with each step, Heath is acutely aware of moving like Ennis would move, careful, measured, carrying invisible weight that bends his spine and shortens his stride. At 3:52 a.m., Heath realizes he's been unconsciously avoiding his own reflection in the window. Heath stops mid-pace and forces himself to stand differently, straightens his shoulders, relaxes his jaw, tries to remember how Heath Ledger moves through space when he's not performing, when he's not conscious of being watched or judged or directed. The effort is exhausting, like trying to remember how to breathe manually, how to blink with intention, how to exist in his own body without the scaffolding of character. At 4:15 a.m., Heath experiences something no acting teacher prepared him for. He's sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet's beige pattern, when a realization hits him with physical force. He has become an expert at disappearing, not just into characters, into emotional states so completely that his own personality becomes irrelevant, disposable, a rough draft to be written over. Heath remembers being proud of this ability, his capacity for total empathy, for finding any character's truth inside himself and amplifying it until it felt more real than his actual life. Now, sitting in this suffocating silence, Heath sees what that gift actually costs: sleep. He hasn't slept properly in 2 months. Every time he closes his eyes, Ennis's dreams invade his unconscious mind, dreams of Jack, of the mountain, of love that must be hidden, relationships. He's been avoiding friends and family because he doesn't trust himself to interact normally, to speak with his own voice, to feel his own feelings. Identity. The basic sense of who he is has become negotiable, conditional, unstable. Heath Ledger feels like a role he's forgotten how to play. At 4:33 a.m., Heath understands he might never completely return from this role. Heath stands and walks to the window. Wyoming stretches endlessly beyond the glass. The same landscape where they filmed Ennis and Jack's story, where 2 fictional characters fell in love and broke each other's hearts. But Heath no longer sees mountains and sky as beautiful. He sees them as Ennis saw them, as reminders of isolation, of dreams deferred, of love that must be hidden from a hostile world. That perspective isn't his. It belongs to a character who died when filming wrapped 3 days ago. But it lives inside Heath now, permanent as scar tissue. The hotel room's walls seem to press inward. Heath's chest tightens. Not claustrophobia, but something worse. This is the moment Heath Ledger realizes he's crossed a line that most actors don't even know exists. The line between performing someone else's emotions and actually living them, between borrowing someone else's pain and making it your own, between method acting and methodical self-destruction. Heath sits on the floor now, his back against the wall. No cameras, no director, no audience reaction to gauge or anticipate. Just Heath and the terrible understanding of what he's capable of. Complete self-dissolution in service of truth. The recognition should terrify him. Instead, it brings a strange, cold clarity. At 5:30 a.m., time stops. Heath is staring at his reflection in the dark window when it happens. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. Time simply stops. The digital clock stops blinking. The hotel's ventilation system goes silent. Even his heartbeat seems suspended between one beat and the next. In that moment of perfect stillness, Heath sees something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He sees how far he's willing to go for his art, how much of himself he's prepared to sacrifice, how little of Heath Ledger needs to remain for the performance to be extraordinary. But more than that, he sees that what happened with Ennis wasn't a mistake. It was a preview. This night has taught Heath something about the nature of transformative performance that most actors never learn. There is no bottom to how deep he can go. His empathy has no natural boundaries. His imagination can consume his identity entirely. Time resumes, clock blinking, air moving, heart beating, normally. But Heath is fundamentally different. The knowledge should make him more cautious about future roles. Instead, it does the opposite, because Heath realizes he's not just an actor anymore. He's someone capable of systematic self-erasure in pursuit of truth. Someone who can disappear so completely into another consciousness that fictional characters become more real than his actual existence. And despite the terror of that knowledge, Heath knows he'll use it again. Heath begins packing with deliberate slowness. Each action becomes an exercise in reclaiming identity. These are his clothes, wrinkled from 3 days of neglect, his toothbrush, his phone charger, his passport with Heath Ledger's name printed inside. But even as he reasserts control over these physical realities, Heath knows the damage is permanent. He's crossed a threshold that can't be uncrossed. Learned something about the space between performer and performance that changes everything. The drive home takes 9 hours. For the first 3 hours, Heath says nothing, plays no music. The same oppressive silence that defined his hotel room travels with him, a psychological weather system that follows wherever he goes. Then, somewhere outside Denver, he forces himself to turn on the radio. The familiar songs feel foreign at first, like hearing a language you used to speak fluently. But gradually, note by note, Heath begins to remember fragments of who he used to be. Mile by mile, he practices being Heath Ledger again, adjusting his posture in the driver's seat, changing radio stations with casual confidence instead of Ennis's careful hesitation, singing along quietly at first, then louder, to songs that belong to his actual life, not a fictional character's emotional landscape. He doesn't return to that person entirely. That version of Heath Ledger, the one who could slip characters on and off like costumes without permanent consequence, no longer exists. In his place is someone who understands that acting isn't about pretending. It's about becoming, and sometimes, becoming someone else means losing essential pieces of yourself. This knowledge will reshape every choice Heath makes for the rest of his career. 2 years later, when Christopher Nolan calls with an offer to play the Joker in The Dark Knight, Heath will remember this night in Wyoming. He'll know exactly what he's risking. The character will demand even more than Ennis did: complete psychological chaos, theatrical madness, the systematic destruction of everything rational and stable in his mind. Heath will take the role anyway. At 5:47 a.m. that night, Heath learned he's capable of complete psychological dissolution. Not because he's reckless or doesn't understand the cost, but because that night taught him something about the nature of transformative art that few people ever discover. It requires everything. Not just talent or dedication or craft, but pieces of yourself you didn't know existed. When Heath pulls into his Los Angeles driveway that evening, neighbors see the same person who left 3 months earlier. Same face, same car, same address. But Heath knows better. The man who drove away from Wyoming is altered in ways that can't be undone or explained. He's discovered that his gift for empathy has no natural limits, that his imagination can consume his identity entirely, and most dangerously of all, that he's willing to let it happen. Heath will spend the next 2 years choosing roles based on how much of himself he's prepared to sacrifice. Some projects he'll turn down, not because they're artistically beneath him, but because he doesn't have enough stable identity left to lose. Others he'll accept, knowing they'll consume months of psychological stability. The Joker will be the ultimate test of this philosophy, a role so demanding, so psychologically destructive, that Heath will spend his final year learning to live with controlled mental chaos. When The Dark Knight premieres, critics will call Heath's performance revolutionary. They'll say he redefined what villains can be on screen, that he brought unprecedented psychological complexity to a comic book movie. But they won't know the real cost. They won't know about the months of insomnia that followed filming, the notebooks filled with disturbing sketches and manic scribbles, the way Heath had to systematically relearn his own personality after the cameras stopped rolling. They won't know that the performance wasn't acting in any conventional sense. It was controlled psychological dissolution, a deliberate choice to let madness live inside his mind for 6 months, knowing he might not survive the experience intact. Heath Ledger pioneered a form of acting that treats identity as expendable, personality as raw material to be shaped and reshaped for each role. The technique produces extraordinary art. It also produces extraordinary casualties. Future actors will study Heath's methods, trying to replicate his complete transformation into character. Some will succeed. Some will lose themselves as thoroughly as Heath did, and never find their way back to who they used to be. In the quiet of his empty house that first night home from Wyoming, Heath sits with a truth that few people will ever understand. Great art sometimes demands everything. Not most things. Everything. Heath Ledger discovered he was capable of giving it. The question that hangs in the darkness. The question he'll carry through every role until his final performance is whether anything recognizable of Heath Ledger will remain when the giving is finished. That night taught him to disappear completely. What he never learned was how to stay,